Good evening and welcome to How We Got Our Bible. This is part 10 of a series we've been studying through based on the book by Ralph Earl by the same name. And we've been trying to learn this summer about where our Bible came from and how it arrived in our hands in the form it's in. And so we've talked in previous videos about the people who wrote the Bible. We've talked about how those books were selected for the canon of Scripture. We've talked about how those books were transmitted through the years and how we can have confidence in the copies we have today. And so we're coming toward the end now of our study, and we have to start talking about translation. So we know the Bible was written in Hebrew and Greek, and we want to know how that got translated to us so that we can pick up our English Bible and give it a read. And so we want to start by talking about translation. And so we're going to start this evening by looking at the earliest translations of the Bible. And the earliest translations of the Bible are actually translations of the Hebrew Old Testament. We have some documents called the Aramaic Targums. And so if you remember your kind of Old Testament history, the Jewish people were carried off into exile, and then they're allowed to come back home. And so they begin meeting together and reading the Hebrew scriptures together. But as they read the Hebrew scriptures together, they don't necessarily speak Hebrew as well as they used to. And so there became a common practice of reading the scripture in Hebrew and then having a paraphrase given in Aramaic. And so those Aramaic paraphrases over time got different things added to them, where maybe there would be even a little bit of explanation or commentary on the scripture given as a part of that. And so the Aramaic Targum is not, it's kind of a translation. It's also kind of a commentary on the text. But that's kind of one of the earliest translations we have of the Bible. Then we move to the Septuagint. The Septuagint is kind of the Bible Jesus would have read. Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And so the early church, they would have had the letters of the apostles in Greek, and then they also would have had the Old Testament translated into Greek via the Septuagint. And a number of times in the New Testament, you'll see where it's actually the Septuagint that's given there as these quotations of Old Testament texts. But the Septuagint, that word, it stands for 70 because the story goes that there were 70 scholars. And whether this story is true or not, we don't know. But the story goes that 70 scholars were like captured and locked up and told to make a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And so these 70 guys each independently translate the Hebrew scriptures, and they each walk out with the exact same translation. Whether that story is true or not is up in the air, but what we do think is true is that there were probably 70 guys that got together and translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. And so the Septuagint is a really important work in the history of the church and of the translation of the Bible as we move the Hebrew Old Testament scriptures into Greek so that we can have a Greek Bible somewhere. And so that's the Septuagint. Then we move into Old Latin. So as Latin kind of takes the place of Greek as the popular language around the world, we start to get a series of different translations into Latin. And this includes New Testament books from Greek into Latin. It also includes Old Testament books into Latin, but almost all of the time those translations were taken from the Septuagint, from the Greek Old Testament rather than from the original Hebrew Old Testament. And so you end up with a translation called Old Latin. That brings us forward like 500 years to Jerome and his Latin Vulgate. And the Latin Vulgate was actually the official Latin translation of the Roman Catholic Church all the way up until 1986. From 1545 to 1986, the Latin Vulgate is the official Latin text of the Bible. And Jerome's work is important because he goes back, and originally Jerome was just tasked with revising the existing Old Latin texts, but he actually goes back and retranslates the whole Old Testament from Hebrew. And he does that with the help of several Jewish rabbis that he brings in to help him make this translation into Latin. And then he also revises the Old Latin New Testament text to make sure that those are more correct. And so that brought the Bible into Latin. And so then we have to talk about how the Bible gets brought into English. Now, the Bible ends up being translated into all kinds of languages all over the world. But for the sake of our study, we're here in the United States, and we're trying to understand how we ended up with the Bible that we have and that we read. And so the first English translation of the Bible was done by John Wycliffe, in 1382. And he translated from the Vulgate. So he took the Latin Vulgate, not the original Hebrew text, not the original Greek texts, but he took the Latin Vulgate that Jerome had done, and he translates that whole thing into a English Bible. That Bible is very short-lived, as Wycliffe is martyred 2 years later. The Bible is published in 1382, and in 1384, Wycliffe is martyred, and his version of the Bible goes with him when he dies. A very interesting thing we see happen with the Bible that I'll just point out here while we're talking about the Wycliffe Bible is a thing that happens over and over throughout history. Is anytime someone makes an effort to make the Bible more understandable by the common people, there's someone that says, hey, that's bad. People shouldn't be able to read the Bible in language that they can understand. And so that's what happened to John Wycliffe. He translated the Bible into English, and that was considered bad, and so he was killed for it. And so then we look at the next Bible I've got here is the Tyndale New Testament. And so this is done by Tyndale, and it is the first printed English New Testament. So the Wycliffe Bible 1382 was before the invention of the printing press. When the printing press was invented, the Bible in German is one of the first things printed on it, but it wasn't until 1526 that the Bible is printed in English, and that's the Tyndale Bible. And there were over 18,000 copies of the Tyndale Bible printed, but the church in England at the time considered this Bible in English to be very bad and very dangerous. And so the church actually bought up all the copies they could of the Tyndale Bible and burned them. And so that results in, there were originally 18,000 copies printed, and today we only have 3 fragments of the Tyndale Bible remaining. So that's a bummer. The next Bible we'll look at is the Coverdale Bible, and we'll cover this one quickly. I think it's Miles Coverdale that does that, and it's the first complete printed English Bible. That's 1535. So it's a full English Bible, cover to cover, in a print version that can be sent out to everybody. In 1539, Coverdale goes over to work on another book called the Great Bible. And so you had the Coverdale Bible. There was another Bible that came out called the Matthew Bible that was based on Tyndale's work. And so the Coverdale Bible, or I'm sorry, the Great Bible, is we take Coverdale, who had been working on his own Bible, and we say, hey, will you look at Tyndale's Bible as revised through the Matthew Bible? Will you look at that and work on that and come up with a version that we can print to use in English churches? And so Coverdale works and translates the Great Bible in 1539, and the Great Bible became the official Bible of the Church of England, and so it was printed on large pages, and it actually came locked so that it could be chained to the pulpit at a particular church to keep that Bible from being stolen or damaged or destroyed. And so the Bible came with a lock so that it could be locked onto the pulpit. The Geneva Bible came out in 1560, Tyndale's work was made illegal due to some various things there in the history of England and the kind of movement away from Catholicism, back toward Catholicism, back away from Catholicism, meant that they ended up in a place where Tyndale's work and anything associated with it, excuse me, was made illegal. And so the Geneva Bible came out in 1560, and it was translated in order to offer something alternative to Tyndale's work. Because remember that you had the Tyndale New Testament that had been destroyed, but then the Matthew Bible was based on Tyndale, the Great Bible was based on Tyndale, and so the Geneva Bible comes out in order to have something not based on the work of Tyndale. The Geneva Bible, interestingly, is the Bible of Shakespeare and the Pilgrims, the Bible that they would have read. So we move from the Geneva Bible. There's a brief interlude of a Bible called the Bishop's Bible, and then we move from there to one that we will all be very familiar with, the King James Bible. And as they searched for a unified version of the Bible for the English Church, for the Anglican Church, it was decided in 1604 that we would assemble 54 Bible scholars from England to help work on translating the Bible into English. And as King James I of England is the kind of patron of this version of the Bible, we find that it gets his name. He's the guy that paid for it, so he gets to have it named after him. Interestingly, the 1611 King James that came out, that everyone points to as one of the greatest literary works of all time, the 1611 King James is not the King James we have today. It was revised in 1613, so almost immediately, as they go back and catch some different errors. But then it's revised again in 1629, it's revised again in 1638, and then finally it's revised in 1769 at Oxford, and the point of that revision was to fix some of the spellings, to make the spelling a little more modern and easier for modern readers to understand. And that 1769 revision of the King James, that is the edition we have today. And so when someone talks about, the King James Bible today, they're talking usually about that 1769 revision. Interestingly, this is what's interesting to me, but the pilgrims that came over to America brought with them the Geneva Bible, while the King James Bible was being printed in England. And I believe I read the King James Bible didn't actually come over to America until like 1778 or something like that. But the Geneva Bible was therefore more popular in the United States than the King James Bible for a very long time. And a lot of the kind of founders of our country, the Bible they might have read would have been the Geneva Bible rather than the King James Bible. But over time, because of the great scholarship that went into the King James Bible and the beautiful poetry of the language there, the King James Bible overtakes the Geneva Bible in America and eventually becomes kind of the dominant translation here in America. This is How We Got Our Bible, Part 10, and that was just to bring us to the King James Bible, which I consider kind of the first of what we might call our modern translations of the Bible. These are the translations that when you go to the Christian bookstore and you pick one off the shelf, you might find this. And so we're going to stop there with the King James Bible for today. And when we pick up next week, we're going to start by talking about modern translations, the approaches that are used, the sources that are used, the way things are translated, and how do we know if a version of the Bible, a particular translation, is good or bad? How do we know if it's helpful or harmful? And so we're going to work on trying to understand that next week. And so I'd invite you to join us again then. May God bless you. Amen.